January 12, 2022. At exactly 2:13 a.m., a machine inside the Northbridge manufacturing plant powered on. The factory had been closed for almost 8 months. The power grid supplying the building had been disconnected. And no employees were scheduled to be inside the facility. Yet the production machine activated anyway. For 47 seconds, the equipment ran normally. Then it shut down again. The Northbridge plant sits on the edge of an industrial district outside the city. For more than 20 years, the building operated as a metal fabrication facility. Large automated machines once filled the factory floor. Hydraulic cutters. Industrial presses. Conveyor systems. Thousands of parts moved through the assembly line every day. But in early 2021, the company announced the factory would close. Production was relocated to another facility overseas. The building was shut down. Most of the equipment was removed. And the power supply to the main production hall was disconnected. Only a minimal security system remained active. The plant itself was supposed to be completely inactive. The first person to notice the anomaly was Caleb Mercer, the night security guard assigned to monitor the property. Caleb worked alone during overnight shifts. His job was simple. Watch the surveillance cameras. Check the perimeter alarms. And report any signs of trespassing. Most nights were quiet. The factory grounds sat empty after midnight. The long concrete parking lot remained dark. Wind occasionally rattled loose metal panels along the building walls. But nothing ever moved inside the factory itself. At least, not until that night. At 2:13 a.m., Caleb noticed a flashing indicator on one of the surveillance monitors. Camera 17. Production Hall B. The camera feed showed one of the large fabrication machines in the middle of the factory floor. The machine's internal lights had turned on. At first, Caleb assumed the camera was malfunctioning. But then the machine started moving. The metal arms inside the equipment began rotating slowly. Hydraulic pistons engaged. The conveyor rollers beside the machine started turning. The equipment was running exactly the way it had during normal factory operations. Except for one thing. The factory had no power. Caleb switched the monitor to full screen. The camera showed the massive machine operating alone in the dark production hall. Most of the building lights were off. Only the internal lamps inside the machine illuminated the surrounding area. The rest of the factory floor remained silent and empty. No workers. No technicians. No vehicles. Just the machine. Running by itself. Caleb looked at the timer on the surveillance recording. The machine continued operating. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. 30 seconds. Then at 47 seconds, the machine stopped. The internal lights shut off. The production hall returned to complete darkness. Caleb replayed the footage immediately. The machine had clearly activated on its own. There was no visible person nearby. No movement anywhere else in the factory. The security system logs showed no entry through the doors. No alarms had been triggered. According to every sensor in the building, the factory was empty. Yet the equipment had run exactly the same way it would during a normal production cycle. The following night, Caleb monitored the cameras carefully. At 2:13 a.m., the same thing happened again. The machine activated. The internal lights turned on. Mechanical arms began moving. Hydraulic pistons engaged. The conveyor rollers started rotating. And exactly 47 seconds later, everything stopped. The machine shut down. The factory went dark again. Caleb reported the incident to the building management company the next morning. At first, the managers assumed the footage showed a simple electrical fault. Industrial machines sometimes retain residual energy in backup capacitors. But Daniel Ortiz, the maintenance engineer assigned to inspect the factory systems, quickly pointed out a problem with that explanation. Residual power could not operate a machine for 47 seconds. Especially not one of that size. And according to the electrical records, the building's main power line had been disconnected completely. The production hall should have been electrically dead. No power. No current. Nothing capable of activating the equipment. Yet the surveillance footage clearly showed the machine operating normally. As if the factory were still running. Daniel reviewed the camera recording several times. One detail caught his attention. The machine did not start randomly. It began operating at the exact same time every night. 2:13 a.m. And it ran for the exact same duration. 47 seconds. Which meant something inside the factory was controlling it. Something that was activating the equipment on a schedule. But according to the system logs, there was no automated program left in the building. The entire production control system had been removed when the plant closed. 3 nights later, Caleb continued watching the surveillance feed. The empty factory floor remained silent. Rows of inactive machines stood motionless in the dark production hall. Then the clock reached 2:13 a.m. again. The machine lights turned on. The equipment started moving. And this time, the camera captured something new. A faint shadow moving behind the machine. For just a moment. As if someone had walked past the equipment. Inside a factory that was supposed to be completely empty. January 16, 2022. By this point, the machine had activated 4 nights in a row. Always the same time. 2:13 a.m. Always the same duration. 47 seconds. And every time the factory security system recorded the same thing. Machine press unit B7 powering on inside production hall B. The building management company decided the incident required a full inspection. The engineer assigned to investigate the equipment was Daniel Ortiz, a senior maintenance technician who had worked at the Northbridge plant before it closed. Daniel knew the factory floor well. He had repaired most of the large fabrication machines over the years. But when he arrived at the plant and reviewed the surveillance footage, something immediately stood out. The machine was running exactly as if the factory production system were still active. Except that system had been removed months earlier. The first step was verifying the power supply. Inside the factory's electrical control room, Daniel opened the main breaker panels connected to the production hall. Every line feeding the fabrication machines had been disconnected when the building shut down. The heavy industrial cables that once powered the equipment had been removed completely. Only the security system remained connected to a small independent power line. Daniel checked the wiring again. Then he checked it a second time. There was no electrical path capable of powering press unit B7. Yet the surveillance video clearly showed the machine operating. Later that afternoon, Daniel walked through production hall B with Caleb Mercer. The factory floor was silent. Massive steel machines stood motionless beneath the high ceiling. Most of the overhead lights had been turned off when the building closed. Dust covered the equipment. The air inside the hall felt heavy and still. Daniel stopped in front of the machine that had been activating every night. Press unit B7. It was one of the largest machines in the building. A hydraulic forming press used to shape thick metal components during production. The machine stood nearly 3 meters tall. Steel arms surrounded the central press head. Conveyor rollers extended along one side of the equipment. Daniel ran a flashlight beam across the control panel. The machine was clearly inactive. No indicator lights. No powered systems. No connected power cables. In fact, the main power line that once fed the press had been physically removed from the wall behind it. There was simply no way for electricity to reach the equipment. Daniel opened the machine's service panel. Inside the cabinet, dozens of wires connected the control circuits and sensors. Some of the wiring had been disconnected when the factory shut down. But most of the internal components remained intact. Then Daniel noticed something strange. One of the signal wires inside the panel was still connected. A thin diagnostic cable. It ran through the machine chassis and disappeared beneath the factory floor. Daniel crouched down and traced the cable with his flashlight. The wire entered a conduit pipe embedded in the concrete floor. A conduit that connected the machine to the old factory automation system. Years earlier, the Northbridge plant had used a centralized control network. A large computer system monitored the production line and automatically activated machines during different stages of manufacturing. When the factory closed, that system had been removed. Or at least, most of it had. Daniel followed the conduit pipe across the floor. It led toward the far side of the production hall. Toward a small room built against the wall. The door label was faded, but still readable. Automation Control Room. Daniel looked at Caleb. "I thought they removed all of this," he said. Caleb shook his head slowly. "So did everyone else." Daniel pushed open the door. Inside the room sat an old metal equipment rack. Dust covered the shelves. Most of the computer hardware had been removed. But one piece of equipment remained. A small industrial control unit mounted inside the rack. Its indicator light was glowing faintly. Daniel stepped closer. "That shouldn't be on," he said quietly. According to the electrical diagrams, this system should not have any power at all. Yet the device was clearly active. Daniel checked the wiring behind the unit. A thin backup line connected the controller to a separate power source somewhere in the building. Possibly part of the security network. Enough electricity to keep the controller running. But not enough to power a full industrial press. Unless the controller was doing something else. Daniel connected his diagnostic tablet to the controller. The system screen flickered on. Old factory software appeared on the display. A program schedule. Daniel scrolled through the event logs. The entries were old. Most dated back to the final weeks before the factory closed. Then he reached the newest entry. Timestamp, 2:13 a.m. Command executed, activate press unit B7 duration, 47 seconds. Daniel leaned back in the chair. The system was still running a scheduled program. A command that should have stopped years ago. Yet somehow the controller was still sending signals through the old automation network. Every night. At exactly 2:13 a.m. Caleb looked around the room. "So the controller is starting the machine." Daniel nodded slowly. "It's sending the command. But that doesn't explain how the press actually runs." The machine still had no power supply. There was no electrical connection strong enough to move those hydraulic pistons. Which meant the signal from the controller was only part of the mystery. Something else inside the factory was completing the process. Something capable of powering the machine. For exactly 47 seconds. Every night. That evening, Daniel made a decision. They would record the next activation from inside the production hall. 2 cameras were placed around the machine. One focused on the control panel. The other aimed toward the dark side of the factory floor behind the equipment. If anything moved near the press when it started, they would see it. At 2:12 a.m., the cameras were recording. The production hall remained silent. Rows of dark machines stood motionless in the shadows. Then the clock reached 2:13 a.m. And press unit B7 turned on again. January 18, 2022. By now, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Every night at exactly 2:13 a.m., the same machine inside the abandoned factory powered on. The building had no operational power grid. The production system had been dismantled months earlier. Yet press unit B7 continued to activate. Always for 47 seconds. No more. No less. Daniel Ortiz had confirmed that an old automation controller inside the factory was still transmitting commands through the original production network. But the controller alone could not power the press. The hydraulic pistons inside that machine required a large electrical current. Without power, the press should not move at all. Yet the surveillance footage clearly showed the machine operating. The only way to understand what was happening was to record the event from inside the production hall itself. 2 cameras were installed around the machine. One camera faced the front control panel of press unit B7. The second camera faced the darker side of the production hall behind the machine. Daniel wanted to capture everything. Any movement. Any electrical activity. Any sign of interference. The cameras were connected directly to the security monitoring system. Marcus Hale and Daniel Ortiz would watch the footage live from the control room. At 2:12 a.m., the factory floor remained silent. The large production hall was almost completely dark. Only a few emergency lights illuminated the concrete floor. Rows of idle machines stood motionless beneath the tall steel ceiling. The camera feeds showed nothing unusual. Dust covered the equipment. The air inside the building barely moved. Then the clock changed. 2:13 a.m. The machine lights turned on. On the first camera feed, press unit B7 activated exactly as it had every other night. The control panel lights illuminated. Mechanical arms began rotating slowly. Hydraulic pistons engaged. The conveyor rollers beside the press started turning. The machine moved with the same precise mechanical rhythm it had during normal factory operations. Marcus checked the system clock. The timer had started again. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. 30 seconds. Everything looked identical to the previous recordings. Until Daniel noticed something on the second camera. The second camera faced the darker side of the production hall behind the press. At first the image looked normal. Just rows of silent machines standing in shadow. But as the machine lights brightened the area slightly, something appeared in the background. A shape. Marcus leaned closer to the monitor. The shadow stood near one of the steel support columns, partially hidden by the darkness of the hull. At first it looked like a trick of the lighting. But the shape moved. Slowly. As if someone had stepped forward from behind the column. Daniel paused the recording. They replayed the footage again. The shadow appeared at the same moment the machine started running. And as the press continued operating, the figure moved slightly closer to the machine. It was difficult to see clearly. The factory lighting was extremely dim. But the camera captured the outline of something standing in the production hall. A tall silhouette. Human-shaped. Standing behind the equipment. Marcus checked the security logs immediately. No doors had opened. No motion sensors had triggered. According to every system in the building, the factory was still empty. Yet the camera clearly showed something standing inside the production hall, watching the machine operate. The timer continued running. 40 seconds. 45 seconds.